It's another Friday, so let's get to some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned in to another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. And you can check us out on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners tuning in, if you want to know more about this channel, I bring you episodes Monday through Friday, 30-minute episodes in length. And during the season, we also have the Locked On Royals postcast, which is hosted by a different host in Chance Lebo, and he goes to you live for about 15 to 20 minutes after the game. Before we dive into these questions, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the FanDuel app today. If I miss anybody's question throughout today's episode, just respond to this video. Ask your question again. Be sure to title it Mailbag Friday. That is always a constant here on this channel, where if you want me to use your question in this episode, you got to put Mailbag Friday before you start commenting. Otherwise, it's going to get buried in all the other notifications. So if I did miss your question today, it's not that I didn't want to answer it unless it had vulgar words that would get me in trouble, get me fined. But as long as you have that, and it's a question that we, of course, can answer on this podcast, I will get to every single one of those. But if I do miss it for whatever reason, whether that be on Twitter or on YouTube, just respond to this video, and I'll try to answer it before the end of the weekend. Question number one is coming from Jeff. I believe, and I'm paraphrasing, you said the Royals will be aggressive this offseason. How soon after the World Series will they make an announcement of a signing or a trade? I feel their first signing will happen before the GM meetings, which I believe are like November 10th through the 12th. That's when I expect the first signing to happen. Is it going to be a massive signing? Likely not. The gut feeling I have right now is that Adam Frazier would be one of those guys they would bring back on a cheap one-year deal just to fill one of those bench roles, and also to have some stability and some depth at second base, because that clearly was an issue for this team prior to Adam Frazier being reacquired during the trade deadline. But I would imagine that, give or take 2 weeks after the World Series ends, maybe 3 weeks tops, I would expect at least one signing to happen. Now, the big move, my prediction would be a little closer to the winter meetings, which would be in December. Maybe it would be during the winter meetings, or depending on how the market is, they could wait a little bit after that. But for their first signing, yeah, I'll go about 2 to 3 weeks after the World Series ends. This one's coming from Hoop Intellect. Who do you think is the best fit for a potential outfield acquisition in the offseason? So we get at least once of these every mailbag episode, and it will be the biggest question going into the offseason. Now, we have brought up a variety of names. We've talked about Cody Bellinger. We've talked about Harrison Bader. We've talked about Trent Grisham, Joe Adell, Taylor Ward. The list can go on and on and on. The reality is, for the free agent side of things, the outfield market is pretty thin. You've got your big fish, and we continue to use that comparison throughout this offseason, the big fish, the medium fish, and the small fish. There are 3 or 4 really big fish that I just don't see the Royals being that in play for. The medium fish, I'm not sure if they move the needle as much. But if I was just going on fit alone, and if I can remember some of the times I did those past episodes on player fits and if this guy would make sense, if they're a good target, the one I keep going back to is Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader screams being a Royal, really good defensively, really fast, can hit anywhere in the order, and I feel he would complement Kyle Isbell really well in center field. Catch would be he's going to want to start every day and want starter money and not platoon with Kyle Isbell. So if you go with Harrison Bader, he would be your everyday center fielder, and Kyle Isbell would move into more of that fourth outfielder role. Next one's coming from Beans. If you could only keep one player on the roster next season, who would it be? Michael Massey or Jonathan India? It's such a good question because there are pros and cons to both sides of this. My gut would tell me Michael Massey. Better defense there, younger, cheaper, multiple years of control, and seems to really mesh well with the main core guys in the clubhouse. Not saying Jonathan India doesn't, but Jonathan India is coming off a year where he was banged up. He was well below average offensively. He was one of, if not the worst defender in the sport, and he's worth near $10 million going into next year. So if you don't tender him a contract, he's going to be a free agent and somebody else can pick him up. So you could bring back Adam Frazier, have Michael Massey, and feel somewhat fine about the production. The downside to keeping Massey over India is that Massey is coming off of an even worse year than Jonathan India. He was one of the worst hitters, not only on the Royals, but in all of the American League and all of baseball. Jonathan India, when healthy, and maybe when just focusing on playing second base and not third and left, he can be that league average bat you're looking for at second base. But that's a big if. And I'm done with the Royals playing the if game, the hypothetical game. If this guy can turn it around, they can be really good. I want more sure things. And truthfully, the best sure thing option of the three is Adam Frazier, at least in my opinion. I feel that Adam Frazier can pretty much replicate what he did last year, and that would be great production for the Royals at second base. This one's from Bryce. Would you rather sign a bigger name like Bellinger, or would you rather trade for a bigger name like Joe Adell or Jarren Duran? If they put the money toward Cody Bellinger, I would be all for that. Jarren Duran, I have some concerns for, just because he had that year where he burst onto the scene in 2024, was pretty good in 2025, but I do wonder about the long-term success of him as a player. I feel he'd be fine in Kansas City, but what you'd have to give up to get him, it would be a haul. Maybe the Red Sox have a smokescreen going and they're really not asking for as much as they say they are, but I still feel for Jarren Duran having multiple years of control, being one of their top players, it ain't going to be cheap, right? I don't see it being a Rafael Devers situation because Devers is making a lot of money and they wanted the Giants to take on that contract. Jarren Duran's not making much. So they would try to really take on all of your top prospects, which maybe you would be fine with that, but I would rather be tied up in the money with a Cody Bellinger than to trade for Jarren Duran. Joe Adell, I kind of put him in that same category as Jarren Duran of he's coming off of, well, actually, I take that back. Joe Adell's coming off of a career year where Jarren Duran is 2 years removed from 2 years removed from his career year. Joe Adell, though, has only done it once. Jarren Duran has done it for a couple of years. Joe Adell was fantastic last year, was not on a great team, was not in a great lineup, and still produced. But I do like the upside as a middle-of-the-order bat that the Royals have been searching for. The Angels seem to be really tough to negotiate with. And with first-year manager Kurt Suzuki, not sure they're going to want to strip away all his talent and set him up for failure in year one. So I would rather go big with Cody Bellinger than make those trades for Jarren Duran or Joe Adell. But there are absolutely two schools of thought there. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would rather go get a Jarren Duran or Joe Adell than spend $25 million a year, maybe even more than that, on Cody Bellinger. This one's from another Bryce. Who's an under-the-radar prospect / minor leaguer that could turn some eyes next year in spring training that maybe some Royals fans haven't talked or heard about? Very good question. I would probably want to wait until we get the official invite list to spring training. But looking at some guys that I feel pretty confident will be in surprise, Eric Sarantola is somebody that didn't put up good numbers last year. Steven Zobak kind of in that same category, but I still believe in their stuff. I feel that they really can pop in spring training. Some of them have high-powered stuff. You got to work with them a little bit more, but those are two guys I'm watching for because with a really strong spring, who knows, maybe they could break camp with the team. If you aren't as familiar with Drew Beam, he's maybe my third favorite pitching prospect in the organization behind David Shields and Kendry Chourio. But David Shields and Kendry Chourio likely aren't going to be in big league camp. Maybe David Shields would be, but not Kendry Chourio. He's far too young to be out there. But I would say Drew Beam is one. If you haven't heard about him, in the draft class that Jack Caglione was in, that David Shields was in, came out of Tennessee, really powerful breaking stuff. And I wouldn't be shocked if he had a chance to compete in spring training and maybe even get in a couple of games late, probably closer toward the regular season. But he's somebody that I would watch. And those other two, they're not really prospects anymore. They're age prospects. And they might have a chance in Kansas City next year at some point because they do have that high-powered bullpen stuff. But they got to put it all together, that's for sure. Let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, still a lot of questions to get to next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. Want to tell you about our first sponsor today in Rugiet. Let's be real. Making excuses doesn't solve anything. We've all heard them before. It's just stress, I'm tired, or it happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support. And that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for EDs designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Visit rugiet.com/LockedOnMLB to get 15% off on your first order. That's rugiet.com/LockedOnMLB. And don't forget to use our code LockedOnMLB so they know that we sent you. Rugiet. Stop making excuses and start making moves. Next round of questions is going to begin with Aiden, who is a surprise player the Royals could trade, and who do you think they would be packaged for? Continue the good work. Well, I try as always, Aiden. I know you've been a loyal listener from day one. Some surprise candidates. We know we've talked about Chris Bubich and Noah Cameron before. I still would be pretty surprised if they did move those players. Just because they want to keep their rotation intact. And they definitely have high expectations for both Noah and Chris going into 2026. Some sleeper guys that maybe they would entertain some offers with. Michael Wacha, I feel, is one. Just because you have Berger, you have Kolek, they're cheaper. You might want to move on from that Michael Wacha contract. You might see some of that regression happening. If Seth Lugo wasn't signed to a 3 or 4 year deal, I'd imagine he would be one of those guys they could shop as well. But Wacha, even though he signed that extension last offseason, I could see him being one of those players they entertain. If it was you take on this contract, we'll take on another player's contract. Carlos Estevez is somebody maybe you could entertain because he's coming off a year where he led the league in saves, but he's not a super overpowering closer. He racks up the number of saves. He racked up the workload, basically the inning workload, had a ton of appearances for the most part, was very durable, was very healthy, battled through, not being able to pitch in spring training due to a back injury. But sometimes you got to go back to the theme with the bullpen. You maximize the value out of a reliever, and then you move on from him. And Estevez, it's maybe unlikely that he just duplicates what he did in 2025. So you move on from that contract, somebody that really wants that, successful closer, and the Royals could put Ursig in that role or Steven Cruz and maybe get just fine production or not detrimental production in trading away your closer. I still would say both those are unlikely, though, because they love Carlos. They love the way he fits in that bullpen, and he is coming off of a great year, and they're still in a win-now mode. And when you're in a win-now mode, you don't really trade away some of those guys that you feel are a part of the core. And I feel for the pitching staff, they view Carlos Estevez as one of those guys in the core. But those will be two names I'll throw out there for right now. Maybe Kyle Isbell could be linked in a deal if you brought in someone like Harrison Bader. What they could get in return, that's much tougher to answer because I don't know yet which teams are looking for a closer, which teams are looking for a guy like Michael Wacha or a center fielder like Kyle Isbell. But I'll just give you those names for now that if they were to trade Estevez or Wacha, it would probably be for a bat that has a similar contract that you would be paying anywhere from, $10 to $15 million a year, which could very well be fine. But I don't know if it would be worth it if that player really isn't that much of a difference maker. Good question, though. This one's coming from Brian. Who replaces Vance Wilson if he leaves for Minnesota? Have an awesome weekend. This is another great question. Vance Wilson's been around the organization for so long. Mike Jersley just retired for Omaha. So I don't know if it would be an internal promotion. You might have to go outside the organization, bring somebody back. because you are just trying to fill that third base coaching role and then just to have another coach on the staff. So it's not that you need to overthink it. They absolutely need to take their time with the pitching coaches, not the pitching coaches, excuse me, the assistant hitting coaches to pair with Alex Zumwalt. For Wilson's job, if he leaves, you might be able to bring back a former player, somebody that could really relate to the younger guys, maybe somebody that's, in their 30s, maybe early 40s, because I know baseball is going in that direction. I still have my hesitation, though, with saying that Vance Wilson's going to take that Minnesota job. I believe he was one of the top candidates that they have, and he probably gets a job at some point. But if he does, I would say if he does get that job in Minnesota, that's when we can really start evaluating the candidates. But since Mike Jersley retired in Omaha, I don't really know if they would go with an internal option. They might need to look outside the organization yet again. This one is coming from Justin. Fun question. Who are the Chiefs equivalents for our infielders? Okay, I'll say Patrick Mahomes, of course, for Bobby Witt Jr. Was that Chiefs receivers? No, just Chiefs equivalents here. So Bobby Witt Jr., Patrick Mahomes, Xavier Worthy, Michael Garcia, Vinny Pasquantino. Let's go Travis Kelce. I'm trying to keep it very broad here. And then second base. If it's Michael Massey, maybe a Nico Remigio, maybe. Same goes for Jonathan India. Does play that position, but also helps on special teams, can move around a little bit. So maybe that would be my pick there. If I was to throw Salvador Perez in that, because technically he is on the infield, maybe a Chris Jones type, one of the leaders of the team, one of the guys who's been around for a long, long time. But you could also make a case that he's Travis Kelce as well. But if I wasn't including Salvador Perez, those would be the four that I go with. That is a fun question, though. I did enjoy kind of thinking outside the box a little bit. This one's from Blue in Missouri. What's the forecast for Gamble to make it to the big leagues? Well, you're talking about a prep bat, somebody that still needs to figure out a position, whether it be second base or center field. I would say that the best case scenario is that he's up in 3 to 4 years. If he's up in Kansas City at 21 or 22, that would mean that he's been tearing it up in high A and double A early on in his career, and then you move him rather quickly in year 3. But if we were being realistic with those prep bats, I always try to, give them 4 years, probably at minimum. I would say if you give them 4 years, they're still 22, 23. That feels like the right time to break them into the league if they've been progressing each and every year. I mean, Carter Jensen was the 21 or 22 draft? I want to say that he was the 22 draft. Because I want to say 21 was Mozzicato and Kudrna, but Jensen was a third rounder, so I don't remember if he was 21 or 22, but that kind of fits my timeline anyway. That's around, 3 to 4 years or 4 to 5 years before you get to the big leagues. You want those guys to progress. You want those guys to mature, really get seasoned, and then get their shot in the big league. So I'm not expecting him to be up until 2029, 2030. This one's from the Mizzler. Do you think we should trade / move on from Daniel Lynch, given the underlying metrics being a really bad high whip pitcher, and the only lefty in the pen I really trust right now is Serpa, and think we need another one or two? I don't know what the trade value would be for Daniel Lynch. I've thought about this, though, because last year, Daniel Lynch was not as reliable as a reliever. He wasn't put in those high leverage spots. He really popped late in the year in 2024, as we all know, but the metrics were not good for Daniel Lynch in 2025. He dealt with a lot of base runners. He got hit hard. He had a lot of fortunate luck, that's for sure. I mean, to have a sub-3 ERA with a whip that's well above the league average, you didn't strike out many guys. You didn't throw that hard. It's one of those situations where it goes back to that theme of relievers. You get your value out of them, and then you move on. Then you trade that reliever. I would rather them go with some lefties that have high-powered stuff or funky angles. Angel Serpa gives you the hard sinker. Daniel Lynch really doesn't give you any power pitch. He doesn't limit the hard contact. He walks too many guys. He doesn't strike out enough. I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I would look into that, truthfully, because I do feel there's some value there. Some team would want to take on a lefty reliever that you just look at the ERA, though front offices aren't that stupid. They don't just look at the ERA. They look at the underlying metrics, what they could be next year. But it's a lefty with multiple years of control and a reliever. Somebody would give you something for him. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Royals tried to entertain that, but that would also mean you got to go out there and spend some money on bringing in another lefty that could give you better numbers than Daniel Lynch. Let's take our final break of the show. Still a lot of questions to get to next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. Our final sponsor is our title sponsor in FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. For my picks, I'm going to go money line on two games that have large spreads. I'm going to take Virginia, who is ranked 16th in the country, their 10.5-point spread to win outright in Chapel Hill against the North Carolina Tar Heels and Bill Belichick. And then I am going to take the money line, but also covering the spread for Texas Tech in their game against Oklahoma State. Will Hammond will get the start, so their backup quarterback, but Tech coming off that loss to Arizona State. Oklahoma State's the worst team in the Big 12. 36-point spread in this one. I will take Tech to win and cover that large spread. Final set of questions is going to begin with Jesse. Would it make sense for the Royals to see what the White Sox are wanting in return for Benintendi? $17 million each of the next 2 years is steep, but he was really good the last time he was a Royal, and he's only 31. Royals pay most of his salary, and prospects wouldn't cost much. I would take on Andrew Benintendi's contract if it wasn't $17 million. 17 for the next 2 years. I'm not sure that production is worth it. I would rather them go give somebody $17 million a year that can give you more than what Andrew Benintendi did. He doesn't have a lot of pop. I know he brought it back a little bit with the White Sox last year, but I just have my doubts he's going to be able to do that the next 2 years. If he was around $10 million, I would entertain it, that's for sure, because it's a good name to bring up here. The Royals did love Andrew Benintendi, and he was great in Kansas City. Even was an all-star one of the years. But that's just too steep for me. $17 million to take on that production, and you'd have to give up some prospects. I'm just not sure that's a move that J.J. Piccolo would be wanting to do. This one's from Prepsley. What if they try to get Kazuma Okamoto? He's an intriguing hypothetical to me regarding how he could fit with the Royals, as he puts up respectable defensive metrics, is known as a power threat with the bat, and isn't a liability on either side of the ball. Yeah, whenever you go with those international prospects, I always try to entertain it a little bit. Here's my pushback. The Royals rarely dip their toe in the pool over in Japan. Even though those players can translate to the big leagues, we've seen it numerous times before. We're in a different age now where I would say that every single international superstar coming from Japan will sign with the Dodgers. Now that Ohtani's there, Yamamoto's there, Sasaki's there, those were 3 megastars in Japan. And so if you're just somewhat of a star, a good player, you're probably going to go sign with the Dodgers unless they just don't give you that contract. But in my opinion, I would at least entertain it. I know the Royals were over at one point trying to scout Yamamoto, Sasaki. At this point, though, just expect those guys to go to the Dodgers. And if not the Dodgers, I could see them going to Toronto. And I'm not just saying that because they're both in the World Series. Toronto is a very attractive site for a lot of players coming over from Japan. Let's jump over to YouTube here and get to a question from Braden. Mailbag question for you, Jack. When the Royals had brawls with the White Sox and others during the contending years, it made it seem like they weren't going to be pushed around by anybody. Not saying they need to start brawls every night, but is it necessary to have that mentality when facing the toughest teams moving forward? And can they find anyone that can usher in that mentality in free agency or via trade this offseason? Keep up the great work. Thanks for the kind words as always. I've gotten this more than a few times in the season. Of do they need to have more fire, right? Do they need to get ejected? Do they need to start these brawls? Brawls just aren't as common anymore in baseball. As much as it pains me to say that, because they are entertaining when you see these guys, go back and forth. Somebody gets hit by a pitch and there's a brawl. The reason that there isn't, suspensions are hefty, fines are hefty, and somebody always looks like the bum in that situation. If you have players that are chirping, a guy gets thrown up and in, he thinks it's intentional. It's really not. Guys just aren't jumping the gun anymore. Whether that be there's less fiery players out there, guys that don't want to go throw a punch and then break their hand. Those Royals teams, they had a reason to. They definitely thought that they were being targeted. They had been hit by, or they had the most hit by pitches of anybody through like the first 2 months of the season in 2015, and the White Sox were hitting them a lot, and they were sick of it. If the Royals got in a scenario like that, they probably would. But I just don't know if I see anybody on that roster that would take getting plunked unless it was so obvious it was intentional that I don't think they would jump to conclusions and try to charge the mound. I remember they got close when Bobby Witt Jr. was approaching the cycle against Arizona and needing a triple, or it might have been a home run. They plunked him on the first pitch. And it was a soft 88-mile-an-hour fastball, but it certainly looked a little suspicious, and Salvador Perez was really upset. Bobby Witt Jr., who rarely gets upset, he showed some emotion. He glared out at the pitcher. But it would take a pretty obvious intentional hit by pitch or somebody spiking somebody to warrant a brawl. Now, more ejections, showing more fire in certain situations, I'm all for it. But for brawls, you really got to be sure in what you're doing, because the last thing you want is a multiple game suspension, or worse, you get hurt for an extended period of time. But it's a fair question. I know those teams had guys like Mike Moustakas and Lorenzo Cain and even at one point Johnny Gomes that were not afraid to express their opinion and let people know that they were not going to be pushed around. This one's coming from Amy. Who do you think will win the World Series, Blue Jays or Dodgers? I'm going to roll with the Dodgers here. They've just dominated so far. That rotation is unstoppable. You've got the best player on the planet in Shohei Ohtani. You still have Betts. You still have Freeman. 2 MVP winners right there. They seem to be an unstoppable force. And the Blue Jays, as great as they've been, you look at the 7-game series they had to go into. They can't be more rested than the Dodgers. The Dodgers are completely fresh. They're 100%, a rotation that's dominating. But you're going to get this awesome clash, force versus force, with that rotation in L.A. going up against a red-hot Blue Jays lineup. But I'm going to go with the Dodgers in 6. KC United's question, what is your favorite dinner to eat while watching a game at home? I'd probably say burgers on the grill, just keep it very baseball traditional. I do burgers or hot dogs, get a couple of sides in there as well. If I'm going to be watching somewhere, I love to go to Coach's sports bar that's near my house, go get a couple of beers, enjoy pretty much everything they have on the menu. Never been opposed to wings either. I'm more of a wings guy with football. I don't know why I don't have them as much during baseball season, but when it comes to baseball, if I'm at home, throw a couple burgers on the grill and enjoy that. So I'll probably give you that as my answer. This one's from Bob. I think Bellinger is a great idea for a trade. His Mailbag Friday question, though, I think to move our infield from top 10 to top 1 or 2, it means that a Gold Glove type second baseman would have to be there. Do you think they can move to upgrade defensively? Well, Michael Massey, I feel, can be a Gold Glove defender. Will the bat ever play to be an everyday starter? The jury's still out on that. And maybe we already have our answer, right? He's been in the league for more than a couple of years now. This will be his 4th or 5th year in Kansas City, so it's not like he's had 1 year under his belt. He would have to show something, not just in spring training, but immediately, that he can be that starting second baseman. Frazier's a fine defender, not Gold Glover. I'm not sure if there would be anybody out there that would make a ton of sense to trade for or sign that you're just worried about Gold Glove defense. In my opinion, it's all about the offense. If they can find a second baseman that's a league average bat, that can be a top 3 infield in all of baseball. This one is coming from Brad. Could the Royals trade for Brian Reynolds? What would it take to get him? They were interested going into the trade deadline. It's a big contract, though, and Brian Reynolds isn't coming off of a great season. Maybe they're going to count on that bounce back. But I'll just keep echoing what I've said all offseason. I don't want too many bounce backs, and certainly not guys that are making a ton of money over an extended period of time. Brian Reynolds is one of those players. And the Pirates, they should be in sell now mode, try to get younger players, but they also need to make it seem enticing to Paul Skeens, who at some point is going to make big time money, and I doubt it's going to be in Pittsburgh. But what would it take to get him? If you took on a chunk of that salary, I'm not sure you'd have to give up anybody inside your top 5 for the farm system, but also Pittsburgh is going to be looking for offensive help. That's a place they really struggled last year. So they're going to want offensive help. Maybe they would be asking for somebody like Carter Jensen, and I wouldn't even budge on that. I'm not trading Carter Jensen for a guy like Brian Reynolds. Very fair question, though. This one is coming from, looks like Bryce, and this will be our last one of the episode. I like the bold prediction. Maybe do an episode on bold predictions. Could be a special Mailbag Friday type episode where you discuss all the fans' bold predictions. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be open to that. Why not next week if I can remember? So, Bryce, I'll probably count on you to bring this back up next week. Why not next Thursday we could look into that being a bold prediction episode that I'll go through. I'll give you guys credit, and I'll give you the likelihood of that bold prediction coming true. We actually have one more here. I missed this. This one's from Steve. Do you think having Jonathan India playing multiple positions, the outfield, third base, and second base, hurt his performance both offensively and defensively? And also, what's the chance of India being with the Royals next year? Keep up the good work. As always, I enjoy your show. And thanks, as always, for the kind words. I do believe that affected his defensive abilities. I'm not sure it affected him at the plate. I believe that was more so about the injuries he was going through. He got spiked. He got hit in the head. He had the quad injury. He had the knee injury. He was just the wrist injury as well. He was banged up all season long. But defensively, yes, having to learn the outfield, playing third base, I think it just screwed with all of his footwork and his capabilities of playing second base. And so when you have the output that he did in the outfield and at third, it just didn't translate well back over to second base. But to me, the numbers at the plate were due to him just not being healthy. And maybe the Royals say, he's going to be healthy next year. We count on him being our everyday second baseman, and we expect better numbers. But absolutely, I do believe that moving around made him one of the worst defenders in the entire sport. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. For your second, find the all-night Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off this weekend, but back on Monday. Until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.